you, Amir. I want to welcome our last panel for today and ask everyone from this panel to unmute themselves, please. Thank you. Once again, my name is Zahra Amanpour, and I am very happy to moderate this panel with our community members. As you all know, OIAC represents more than 40 chapters across the US and is the largest, most organized, and enduring network of Iranian Americans since the 1980s. It is a multi-generational organization, and I am very proud to be representing the voice of the Iranian American community of New York and New Jersey today. I am joined with Humaira Hesami, the chairwoman of the Iranian American community of North Texas, Gila Andalib, director of the Iranian American community of Connecticut, and Nasser Sharif, president of California Society for Democracy in Iran. Thank you all for being here today and welcome. Let me start with you, Humaira. As we've heard from the previous panelists, confronting the Iranian regime's terrorist agenda, which comes in the form of physical and cyber attacks, is a must. I know many of our panelists today were in Paris in 2018 and were a direct target of a terror plot, which thankfully foiled. The perpetrators were arrested, including Assadi, the regime's diplomat. He's now facing 20 years in prison. Humaira, please tell us the perspective of your community members, as I understand several hundred Iranian Americans from Texas attended this event.
Thank you, Zahra. Yes, our community has been following Assadi's court trial in Antwerp, Belgium, very closely. And this is the first time a sitting diplomat, a senior Iranian diplomat, has been on trial for terrorism. And all the evidence point to the fact that the order was issued at the highest level of the Iranian regime. I was there myself, as you mentioned, and so was many family and friends, and so many of our community members from all over Texas. We were all present in that gathering. And it's still to this date, it's shivering when I think about what could have happened with all those, thousands family members and, children that could have, perished in that gathering. And to be honest with you, when it comes to this topic, it's astonishing to see some of our politicians still talk about the idea of diplomacy as a means to deal with the Iranian regime. This is the regime, this is the same regime that uses its embassies and its so-called diplomats to conduct terror operations all over the world and against its own citizens. How could we use diplomacy with this regime? So I do agree with the policy recommendations that being said today, being discussed today, and making sure that the Iranian regime terrorist activities are curtailed. We should not allow Iran's terrorist diplomats hide behind the so-called diplomatic immunity. What the regime is really asking is impunity rather than immunity. So we must definitely stand firm against the regime and its terror plots.
Such great points. The issues of immunity and impunity are so important. Just last week, Amnesty International renewed its call to hold the Iranian regime accountable, urging the international community to address the impunity for the massacre of thousands of political prisoners in 1988. Our previous panels also touched on this issue, that the international community can play a very effective role when it comes to the issue of human rights. So let me turn to Mr. Sharif. In your view, what are the specific measures that the United States can consider in dealing with Iran's terrorism and human rights violations?
Thank you, Zahra. I would echo what my colleague said from Texas. The terror plot against the Paris event hit too close to home for us in California. This is an event that was attended by 100,000 Iranians from the global diaspora community, and California probably had one of the largest representations there. I was there with my wife and my two boys. If the plot was not foiled, the bombing could have potentially resulted in the death of thousands of participants and their families, including mine. Looking at my children here and thinking of my loved ones back home, it worries me immensely that there are still some who turn a blind eye and refuse to stand firm against this regime in Iran. But coming back to your question, I would say the United States can and should follow a few points that I would like to emphasize on. Number one, focus on the people of Iran and their struggle for democracy and freedom. When the students, women, labor movement, union workers, retired workers, environmentalists, and activists are protesting and calling for change and freedom, recognize their voice and the true voice of Iran and denounce the regime's oppression. Number two, place Iran human rights record at the bedrock of US policy on Iran in 2021. Number three, hold to account the regime's political, judicial, and security officials who are directly involved in arrest, torture, and executions. Sanction them, name them, shame them. It is these steps that will prevent further violence and killings of nonviolent protesters. Number four, make the Iranian regime understand that America has zero tolerance for attacks on Iran's ethnic and religious minorities who are suffering from state-sponsored hate speech, crimes, and legalized cultural, social, economic, and political attacks. These are just several initial steps that comes to mind to end the impunity when it comes to the issue of human rights. And rest assured that we will work with our members of Congress to ensure the voice of the Iranian people is being heard in US Congress. We are very proud of the majority House Resolution 374, which had very strong bipartisan support, and the main two sponsors of that resolution are from California.
That was definitely a unified statement and a great accomplishment. In fact, I'm reminded of what my senator, Bob Menendez, said in one of our events, and I quote, "While in Congress, we may have differing approaches about the best way to address the threat from Iran. Rest assured that we remain united in opposition to the regime's ongoing abuses against its own citizens." Indeed, our members of Congress have been with us every step of the way, and we are very proud to continue to work in a bipartisan fashion on the issue of Iran. So let me turn to Gila. I want to pick up on the issue of the women's movement in Iran and get the perspective of how US policy in Iran can empower the women in Iran in 2021.
Thank you, Zahra. As I think this is probably one of the important elements that usually gets lost in the political noise and disinformation campaign by the Iranian regime. Last week on Thursday, California Women's Society for Democracy in Iran held a very impressive online event calling for an end of violence against women with many elected officials from local, state, and national levels. Congresswoman Judy Chu brought up House Resolution 1147 that points to, and I quote, "the importance of taking a feminist approach to all aspects of foreign policy, including foreign assistance and humanitarian response, trade, diplomacy, and accountability mechanisms," unquote. So I would say going into 2021, the way to empower Iranian women is to recognize their voice for change in the US policy. More specifically, recognize women who are leading change in Iran, like Mrs. Mariam Rajavi, whose 10-point plan calls for gender equality, calls for free market economy, for legitimacy of the ballot box, and a secular non-nuclear Republic of Iran. I think a new policy in Iran must rise above the noise that's generated by the mullahs' disinformation campaign that is circulating online and in the media. And the only way we can do that is to take a feminist approach to foreign policy, as Congresswoman Chu suggested. As for us, we will continue to advocate the voice of women and the people of Iran until a free Iran becomes reality.
Absolutely, yes, we will. Let me turn to Nasser. As we reflect on the US policy in the last 4 decades, what are some of the lessons learned that we can take into 2021?
I think it's very important to not to repeat the past mistakes and ignore the message of the Iranian people. Washington must recognize the change in Iran will come from within, and no matter how much the Iranian regime tries to lobby to lock the policy discussion in endless negotiations or hint on another endless war, there is a third option on the table, and this is the people of Iran are risking their lives on a daily basis to set themselves free of this regime. This regime is incapable and unwilling to shift its focus on the issue of terrorism, human rights violations, and drive for more weapons in their way is the only way that they can survive. With that said, I think US policy must demonstrate zero tolerance on the issue of Iran's missile program.
Excellent point. Homaira, can I get your thoughts on this, please? What lessons can we take into 2021?
Yes, I totally agree with Nasser on this subject. And I think I want to take it even further. I want to say, even if the US decides to go back to the negotiation table, any agreement has to consider at least these 2 factors. First, we have to recognize the full spectrum of mullah's threat to the people of Iran, to the region, and to the entire world. So we shouldn't ignore this important factor. And the second part is that we shouldn't ignore the voice of Iranian people in coming months. When people of Iran chant reformer, hardliners, the game is over, they really mean it. They believe that there is no difference between the IRGC and Sharif. Both are 2 sides of the same coin. Also, when they chant no to the turban, no to the crown, it means the people denounce both the monarchy and theocracy. People do not want to go backward. Why would they? So Iranians are going to move forward toward the democracy. And I truly believe these factors should be the compass in any US policy.
Thank you, Homaira. Gila, let me get your reaction. What do we take into 2021?
I would say align the policy with the voice of women, students, labor movement, union workers, environmentalists, as the entire Iranian nation are calling for change from within. I would also say to all the policymakers that when in doubt, look at the realities on the ground in Iran. We have a regime that is corrupt, stands on terrorism and weapons of mass destruction. Which side of the history do you want to stand on? I would choose the side of the Iranian people.
I would definitely choose the side of the Iranian people too. Excellent point. Let me give each of you a quick chance now to close our panel. The political environment in Washington is changing. Do you think the voice of the Iranian Americans can be heard in 2021? Homaira, can we start with you?
Sure. I think absolutely that's one of our goals, that is to work with the voice of Iranian people and work with the both elected officials, from both sides of the aisle, to echo this Iranian voice, and we will continue to do so.
Great. Nasser?
Yes, I agree. The most important thing is to make sure the voice of Iranian people will be heard in Washington as they advocate change with their chant and say, Mullahs get out, and we want freedom and peace.
Absolutely. Gila?
Well, I'm looking forward to a much healthier political environment where we can, in fact, give the truth and facts a chance, especially in the media when it comes to the people of Iran and the opposition movement that's led by a woman, Mrs. Mariam Rajavi.
I don't think anyone can dispute that. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, let me invite my fellow moderators and other panelists to rejoin us with your video as we close out our program today. I want to thank our panelists today. I really enjoyed that conversation and learned a lot. I want to wish everyone happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you.